Hello and welcome to another special edition episode of Throttle Finance. My name is Felicia. I am your CEO at Clean Lead Consulting. And today is another special episode coming at you from COTA, Circuit of the Americas. Look at how rad this view is. You know, this is such a cool facility, and it's one of my favorites on the entire MotoAmerica circuit. And if you've been a follower of our podcast from the beginning, you would know that the audio that intros into our podcast every single episode that we post is actually Formula One cars that I recorded, actually my other half recorded out here in 2013 when we were out here for Formula One. So this track, this circuit specifically, holds a very special place in my heart. So this weekend, I'm out here at MotoAmerica for their 2025 race round. And we've got a lot of exciting things going on. There's a lot of really good classes out here racing. We've got Talent Cup, we've got King of Baggers, we've got Super Sport, we've got Super Red, and we've got Stock 1000. Since I'm riding solo this weekend without Ali, we decided to do a little bit of a different format for this week's episode and next week. So we're going to do a little get to know your CEO at Clean Lead Consulting today, and then make sure you come back next week for an extra fun episode where we're going to give you a little bit of a peek at what it's like to be a professional out here in the MotoAmerica paddock. But first and foremost, I actually want to take some time to thank Orange Cat Racing Crew because they've graciously extended their hospitality suite to me for this event this weekend, and I get to ride in style, and it's pretty cool. Both Andrew Lee and Jason Uribe are in the top 3 contenders for the Stock 1000 championship that's going to be crowned this weekend. So it's really special being part of such a close-knit family filled with families, and it's really honestly so humbling to be part of that. And so thank you, Orange Cat. You guys are the absolute best. So let's get to some questions. So between us, I don't know all of the questions that are in the queue today. You're gonna get some pretty honest and pretty candid responses from me. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first question that I've got on my list is, if you could go back to day one of starting your firm, what is one piece of advice that you would give yourself? I think that's a really great question. I have had a common theme in my life. It's a theme of patience. If you're patient, the answer will kind of always naturally come to you. If you're patient, you can observe more, you can learn more, you can make more educated decisions, you can sit with things, you can let it stew, you can see how it resonates with you day over day over day. And I feel like, especially in today's world, there's a rush on everything. Like, everything's gotta be this, now. And that's where you make rushed decisions. And in business, rushed decisions can oftentimes be your biggest downfall. So I would remind myself on day one to be patient and let everything work out how it's intended to work out. What is a non-negotiable value that you have built your firm on? Setting boundaries. Those are setting boundaries with yourself. That's setting boundaries with your clients. That's setting boundaries with work. And I know it's so hard at times to actually stick to boundaries, but I'm gonna say it again. Boundaries. Establish them and try to stick to them. You will thank yourself in 2 to 3 years' time when you gradually start holding yourself more accountable to holding those boundaries. Which software tool has been your most game-changing tool for business growth? I am going to have to say Asana. a project management system. So something like a ClickUp, something like a Trello, something where you can outline all the things that need to get done, someplace where you can assign due dates for when things are due, somewhere where you can communicate with your team and get feedback, somewhere where a manager can see what's going on inside of the business or inside of a program without micromanaging. That has been a very big game changer for me as a CEO, because what it does is it allows me to still manage. It allows me to still hover, but not in a way that's negative for the employee. It's a place where we can put everything all in one place. We know where all of the resources are. It dictates what we work on, when we work on it. And it's literally been the saving grace for us as a firm that manages 30 different clients to keep everything straight and intact and to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So my advice always to every single business is a project management system. And that should be one of the very first tools that anybody sets up for their business. What is a money or business myth that you would like to bust for small business owners? I think for that one, I'd have to say something along the lines of disqualifying yourself before you've actually even sat down to see if you meet the criteria. See that with like tax credits all the time. People think that just because they are a small business, that maybe something doesn't apply with it to them. Like, the research and development credit, to be quite honest. I feel like a lot of people think that that's for pharmaceuticals, or they think that that's for, big software companies, which that does apply to them. But also too, if you're a team out here and you're out here in the MotoAmerica paddock or in an IndyCar paddock or in any sort of performance racing or motorsport, series, you're constantly developing your machine. And so, yeah, maybe some of it does qualify, maybe some of it doesn't, but how are you going to know if you don't ever check? And so that's why we always say the best way to check is to check. You won't know until you just sit down and talk to the professionals. But I see a lot of the times people just automatically disqualify themselves. And I mean, all you're doing at that point is leaving money on the table. Valuable money that really could go back into your program, that could move the needle forward for your program. So, yeah, the myth I'd like to bust is that tax credits only apply to the wealthy or only apply to big businesses. That's a lie. You don't know until you check. Which client win are you most proud of and why? I like that question. My favorite client win story is actually one of our clients who is a CPA, but they are not a practicing CPA. They are a leadership coach, or they do leadership coaching at this point in their career. I impress this person. This is somebody who technically has more credentials than I do in the accounting industry, but something she has often said to me is that I have a way of making these complex topics into a fun learning session for her. And I think that that's honestly one of the best compliments that I ever could have gotten. And this client has gone on to do nothing but increase the scope of work with our firm. We not only do their bookkeeping, but we also do some executive assistant type work for them. We also helped them with some end-of-life organization and turnover and change and all that stuff. It's just a client that really, really trusts us and really has just put a lot of faith in us. And every time I meet with her, she always says something that makes my eyes light up and makes my heart flutter, because it just, coming from someone like that, with that stature and that place in the industry, I really don't think I could get a better compliment. What is your first vivid memory of being at a racetrack? Actually, comes from 2013, right here at this exact same facility, Circuit of the Americas. It was the last year of Formula One running the V8 engines, and my significant other and I came out here because we wanted to hear the V8s before they retired. And we had general admission tickets for Formula One out here. And so we just spent the entire weekend walking around. We couldn't actually get in the paddock, so MotoAmerica was actually the first time that I was ever able to actually step foot inside of the paddock here. But we walked the whole track. We watched the race from turn 1, so it was a really crazy place to watch the race from. We got to walk the track after the race, see all the rubber everywhere, and it was just like really such a cool experience. And we got the itch after that, and after our Formula One race in 2013, and then we went to the Daytona 200 in Daytona Beach, Florida. And then we went to the Rolex 24 and Daytona Beach as well too. You know, that 2013 trip was the catalyst for coming out to more racetracks. If you had to compare running a business to a motorsport race weekend, which part is going to be qualifying and which part is going to be the race? I would say that your gross receipts. I would say that your gross receipts is probably most equivalent to your qualifying session because it determines where you start, just like qualifying determines where you start in the race. Your gross receipts, so the total amount of money that your business brings in, that is going to be what I would say is your qualifying session. It determines where you start. And then I would say the race is actually your net profit then, because when you take out all of your expenses, you land at your net taxable income, your net profit. And that shows you how well you've managed your budget, which also can kind of relate hand in hand to how well you've managed your tires and how well you've managed your fuel throughout the entire race weekend, or throughout the race rather. So yeah, I would say qualifying would be your gross income, and then your net income would be the actual race to see how well you've actually done with your money. What is the most valuable thing that you've learned from your other half who works as a race technician in a motorsport paddock? I'm gonna give this one very simple. The best way to check is to check. It is literally a phrase I use on repeat, and it comes from him saying it on repeat over and over and over again. Which racetrack best represents your personality and why? I'm gonna say Barber, because Barber is weird as hell. I'll keep it PG. It's weird in that, and there's so much going on. There's so many random things, and I feel like that at times is a good representation of what goes on up here in my noggin on a constant basis. So I feel like I relate to Barber a whole lot. Plus, you've got the museum on site that has so much history and so much information. And again, a good representation of what goes on in this noggin right here. If you could build a dream race team tomorrow, what role would you not trust yourself to take on? Ooh, that's a good question. Another thing that I say quite often is the right tool for the right job, right? I think that it's important, especially at the top level, for you to have an idea about what goes on within your business, within your program. But that doesn't mean that you need to do it forever. You need to be able to delegate with confidence. And that means that you need to know where your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And that means that you need to know what your team's strengths and weaknesses are. And that means that you need to know when it's time to change those responsibilities over to the right tool for that job. So as far as me, that's the part of a race team that I think I would be most unqualified for, being the actual racer. I personally like the role of team principal because, again, that's where that whole delegate with confidence, know your team, where all of that comes into play. So that comes into play at the team principal. I'm pretty sure this is super sport. What is the funniest or most random conversation that you've had in the paddock that ended up teaching you something about business? I think I would have to say it's actually a pretty recent experience too. Out at MotoAmerica, out at the Ridge, I met this lady, a very wonderful woman, and I just hit it off with her immediately. And it was really inspiring to kind of just ask questions to her, because she's somebody who has developed multiple lines of revenue that kind of all cohesively intertwine with each other. And that's something like what I'm trying to do here with Clean Me Consulting and with Throttle Finance. So I wouldn't say that it's like one piece of advice that I was given out at a racetrack, but it's more so about the conversations about how other people have developed their businesses. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I like working with small businesses so much, is because you get to talk with all of these different small business owners, and you get to learn from all these different types of businesses what works and what doesn't work, and what works for one might not work for another. And it's those conversations that really just they light a fire under me, because I like to do things in unconventional ways. And the only way that you can do things in unconventional ways is by exposing yourself to people who have also done things in unconventional ways. So, not one specific piece of advice, but I did have a very humbling moment after that conversation at the Ridge. And it definitely made me rethink where we're building the firm, what we're growing it to, where our end goal is. And I think that that's super powerful. What's one trait that you've picked up from your motorsport world that bleeds into your consulting world? This one I think is a really, really big crossover. Change one thing at a time. Just like you would if you're out racing at a racetrack. How do you know what works and what doesn't work if you change 3 or 4 things at a time? There's no way to isolate what change produced what results. And so the same thing goes for building a business. If you change your software and you change your employees and you change this and you change that, how do you know what worked and what didn't work, what the problem was, and if you actually eliminated the problem in your business? Again, I think that's a big crossover, is changing one thing at a time. That's how you know what works and what doesn't work for your business. This next one's an easy one. What's one guilty pleasure snack that always sneaks itself into your workday? Chocolate-covered cherries, if we have them on hand. Specifically, Rainier cherries, but any chocolate-covered cherry will do. I love this next question. Which book, podcast, or mentor has shaped the way that you think the most? And I'm going to tell you, it's not an accounting professional and it's not a finance professional. His name is Max Lugavere, and he is the host of the Genius Life podcast. It is a podcast about health and wellness, but it's the way that he actually approaches topics that really resonates with me. He goes into everything with an open mind, even if he has his own preconceived ideas about a certain topic. He is always willing to look at it from the other side of the fence. Between the way that he just approaches hard topics, which a lot of topics in accounting and finance are hard topics, let's be honest. Beyond that, his books just so resonate with me. If you didn't know, I lost my father to terminal brain cancer back in 2009. So brain health is something that is at the absolute top of my list as a priority. And his books that are centered around supporting healthy brain activity really have changed the way that I do everything in my life, which includes how I show up for business. So if there's one person in the media world that has really influenced the way that I think, it would be Max Lugavere. What is one ritual or habit that you lean on to reset when things get chaotic? That is going to be meditation. And meditation's hard. I never thought that I was a meditator. I'm still very fidgety, honestly, when I meditate on my own, but that's part of it. It's sitting with the uncomfortable and getting becoming okay with the uncomfortable. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's especially hard to do in today's world. But I would be lying if I didn't say that there was a direct benefit to my brain health, to the way I operate, to the way I show up for anybody and everybody in my life when I consistently practice meditation. It's just honestly one of the best medicine tools that you can have in your pocket. What does success really look like for you outside of revenue numbers? Success to me has always been about working my own schedule, doing what I want to do, being able to take off time when I want to take off time, being able to extend those same privileges to my employees and to my staff. That to me is what success is. Revenue is revenue. And yes, that helps. I'm not going to lie about that. But honestly, there are so many more things that are rich in their own without having a monetary value tied to it. And just being able to show up and do business how I want to do business and do business with who I want to do business, that to me is the biggest definition of success that you could show me. What is one hill that you're willing to die on in business? Stop miscategorizing your employees as contractors. You tell them where to be, when to show up, what to do, how to do it, but you are still sending them a 1099 at the end of the year. You are absolutely 100,000% in the wrong. And it's not just a money savings tactic. You're stripping these people of essential rights that they have as laborers in a workforce. Let's call it what it is. And I am absolutely willing to die on the hill of categorizing your employees correctly. What's a mistake that you made early on in life that has actually helped shape your leadership style now? I would say people-pleasing employers. I had a really bad history of people-pleasing all of my employers. And in doing so, it was masking who I really was. And it masked some pretty amazing attributes about myself, if I am being quite honest. And I don't think that it did me any justice, and I don't think that it did my employers any justice. I take that and wear that heavily as an actual business owner now and as a CEO, because I don't want my employees to feel like they're in that position where they need to be pleased too. I want them to be who they are. I want to know what their real talents are, because that's how I can help them tap into what they are really, really, really good at and what they really love doing. That's how I can tap into that and build a sustainable working relationship with that employee. And I think that that is a really big, important thing that is missing in a lot of workforces in today's world. What is your proudest moment so far as a CEO? That has to be how much focus we are putting into education. It is a really, really big, important part of my business model. Everything that we do, education is at the core of it, because they don't teach financial literacy in schools anymore. Yeah, it is something that as an individual even, you are tasked with dealing with every single year when it comes time to file your taxes. You also need to know a little bit about financial education in order to make sure that you're getting paid adequately, that your employer is following labor laws. Like I said, education's at the core of everything we do. Educating ourselves, educating our clients, educating our audience, educating through sponsorships. There's just so many ways that we're able to educate and to make financial literacy something that is not such a, we don't want it to be intimidating. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. We don't want it to be intimidating. We want it to be bite-sized. We want it digestible. And being able to extend educational opportunities to Allie, to my staff, right? That's something that, for me, is something I'm really proud of, because I've always asked my former employers to invest in my education, to invest in my knowledge and my growth as a professional, and they always scoffed it off. And I think that when you show your employees how much you care about making sure that they have the right foundations to do the right things for you and for your business, that is just something that, like, I'm so proud of that we're able to do at our firm. And I really, really hope that more and more businesses start looking at giving their team the proper education that they need to continue to grow in their trade, not just get static and stay where they're at. We want them to continue to grow. So invest in education for your people. It's definitely worth it. And it's a deductible business expense. What's something that you hope people always say about you after they meet you? I've been stewing on what you said, because that means it resonated with you and it's made you think about something from a different perspective. And that's honestly all I could ever ask for. I think that we need to have these healthy debate type discussions with each other. We need to see the differing opinions, because how do you know what you're missing out on? And if you let me take a seat at the table, and that table or that conversation that was had at that table resonates with you enough that you are still stewing on it a couple days later, that means I'm doing my job. And that means I'm doing my job properly. If you could pass down one financial principle to every entrepreneur listening, what would that be? I would say stop disqualifying yourself from things before you've actually sat down to even see if it can apply to you. This kind of builds on what we talked about with the tax credit and disqualifying yourself from that, right? You just don't know what you don't know. So don't say this doesn't apply to you unless you've actually sat down with the professionals to have the conversation to see if it actually applies to you. So stop disqualifying yourself before you've actually have the criteria. What's a value that you would never compromise on, even if it meant losing a client? That's a good one. Ownership and accountability. We hold ourselves accountable and we take ownership when we make mistakes, and that has to be reciprocated. The client and accountant relationship is built on trust. And if you can't take ownership and if you can't take accountability, then there's no trust to be had in that relationship. So ownership and accountability, it's at the forefront of what we embody as professionals in the finance world. And it's also the values that we hold our clients to. And if we find that a client is not meeting those accountability and those ownership standards, we will absolutely cut ties with that relationship, because that's not who we're in business to support. If you could hand a playbook to future entrepreneurs, what would chapter 1 be titled? Give yourself grace. You are doing these things brand new. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna do things right. You're gonna do things wrong. But at the end of the day, you're only human. And humans make mistakes. If you didn't make a mistake as a human, you wouldn't be a human. You'd be a robot. We don't need robots in this world. We need humans. So give yourself grace. All right, team. That's going to be a wrap for today's episode. I had fun. I hope you had fun too. I hope you learned a little bit more about me as your CEO. You know, one of the main reasons why we created this podcast to begin with was to give our listeners a way for them to sit with our brains without actually having to pay us for time to sit with our brains, because we want you to know us before we sign you on as a client. We want to make sure that we're all in alignment. And as for myself, I want to know somebody before I go into business with them, especially if it's going to be somebody who is intertwined in my finances. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure that you tune back next week again as we continue our MotoAmerica walk. Thanks for tuning in and have a great Friday.